Welcome to Hope for Today, a weekly Bible teaching program that will bring you hope for every day. It is good to be with you again today. Thank you for being there. Our study in James has brought us to the middle of chapter 2. Today's lesson is the section where James discusses faith and works. This discussion is a big one, and it is hard for us to hold these two with proper balance. One extreme says we are saved by faith and our works are meaningless. The other side says works are a must. This is how we are saved. I know, on this subject, I must be very careful which words I use and how each sentence is constructed. But I say, relax. I'm not going to say it must be this way or it must be that way. Instead, I want to ask us to be kind and loving. Recognize this. No matter who you are, all of us have room to grow in our knowledge. And then let's be patient with others because they are growing too. None of us have arrived and completely know all things. We can all learn from each other. With this foundation, we can have constructive conversations about faith and works and how they fit together. And with this introduction, let's turn to James 2 and hear from J. Mark as he helps us discover which kind of faith pleases God.
In English, we have a form of speech called an idiom. Idioms often use words or phrases that have no logical connection to the subject they're about, but they make sense to us because we understand how they're used. Let me give you just a couple examples. When someone inadvertently reveals a secret, we say, they left the cat out of the bag. Or if someone finds fault with a gift they've received, we may say, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Now these are very confusing to someone who would take those words literally. There's one particular idiom I'm thinking about in relationship to our study today from the book of James. And that idiom is, show me the money. Now, when we use that phrase, the situation usually doesn't involve money at all. What we're asking for is proof that what the other person tells us is accurate. Can they verify their statement as being true? Are they willing to act on what they've said? I've titled our study, Show Me Your Faith, and our text today is James chapter 2, verses 14 to 26. So listen as I read this portion of Scripture, James 2, beginning with verse 14. What does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith, but does not have works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does that profit? Thus also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith, I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that there is one God, you do well. Even the demons believe, and they tremble. But do you want to know, O foolish man, that faith without works is dead? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered Isaac his son on the altar? Do you see that faith was working together with his works, and by works faith was made perfect? And the scripture was fulfilled which says, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. You see then that a man is justified by works, and not by faith only. Likewise, was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works, when she received the messengers and sent them out another way? For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. The writer of Hebrews reminds us that without faith it is impossible to please God. In our text here in James, he speaks of several kinds of faith. So let's discover the kind of faith that pleases God. The first kind of faith I see in our text is valueless faith. Now you already know from me using that word that this is not the kind of faith you want. But let's explore this kind of faith in verses 14 to 17. James begins by asking his readers a question. He says, if a person professes faith in God without demonstrating that faith through their actions, is that really a saving faith? And then he gives us a very simple example. He says, suppose one of your fellow Christians lacks adequate clothing and he doesn't have enough food. And you pick up your phone and you call him and you tell him you've heard about their need and you even offer to pray with them right there on the phone. But after you pray with them, you say, well, I hope the Lord provides for you, and you hang up. You may even put them on your church prayer chain if you have such a thing. But you don't share any of your food or clothing with them, even though you have more than enough. If you see their needs and you don't attempt to meet them with the resources God has given you, what value do your kind words have? Now, at the risk of being too blunt, we can paraphrase James as saying that our kind words, without action, are only so much hot air. They don't have any value. In the same way, faith that doesn't result in action has no value. It's not genuine faith. The Bible recognizes no faith that does not lead to obedience, nor does it recognize any obedience that does not spring from faith. So James concludes this section with a clear statement: faith without works is dead. Now, we must not confine this teaching to how we respond to the physical needs of other people. In order for faith to have value, it must result in action. So what about the person who doesn't need your clothing or your food, but maybe he needs your time, maybe he needs a listening ear? How about the brother or sister overtaken by sin, and everyone else has written them off? How does your faith respond to them? James tells us forcefully that for faith to have value, it must result in action. And then there's a second kind of faith that James talks about. I've called it vacuous faith. The word vacuous comes from the same Latin root word as the word vacuum. Vacuous faith is empty faith. James illustrates this by telling us about another person. This one says, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. Now here again we see the coupling of faith and works. James highlights one aspect of faith. He says, there is only one true God. Without faith, it is impossible to please God, because he who comes to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who diligently seek him. This belief that God exists is essential. James commends those who believe this truth, but making your faith valid takes more than just an intellectual agreement. Because in verse 19, he introduces a startling comparison. He said, you believe there is one God? You do well. But the demons also believe there is one true God, and they tremble in fear before him. The gospel records tell us of encounters Jesus had with demons. They knew who he was, and sometimes he forbade them from mentioning that to the public. Do you like being compared with demons? I don't either, but do you see James' point? The demons know that God exists. They know they are in mortal combat against him and his followers. But it doesn't change their behavior. They still follow their master, Satan. But what about us? Does our belief make a difference in the way we live? Or is it only an empty profession, an empty acknowledgement? You know, James does not obscure the truth with clever words. He's very clear, direct, and sometimes almost brutally honest. In verse 20, he says this, consider this, O empty, vacuous man, professing belief without any corresponding action, has the value of a corpse. Now, as much as I know that death is a genuine part of humanity, I don't like to view dead bodies. I can't truthfully say, he looks just like he did in life, or the undertaker sure did a good job with her. I know that those who are left behind when a loved one dies need comfort, and they need the support of their family and friends, and I believe it's appropriate to give that to them. And the visitation and the funeral service are for their benefit, the benefit of the living, not so we can comment on how good the dead person looks. So what about your faith? Is it living or is it dead? Is it full of life and attractive to others who see its expression in the way that you live? Or is it dead and empty? Does it give off a nauseating odor that makes people say, you know what, if that's faith in God, I won't have any, thank you. And then there's a final kind of faith, and this is the kind you want. It's validated faith. And James uses two biblical characters to illustrate an authentic faith in this final section of our text. He uses Abraham and his offering of Isaac on the altar as a supreme example of faith, and rightly so. Abraham's actions validated his belief in the promises of God. Hebrews 11:17 tells us, "By faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, that in Isaac shall your seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure." If Abraham had merely said he believed, would that have been enough to make his faith genuine? No. James says that his belief was coupled with action, and his faith was made perfect or validated by what he did. Abraham's deeds proved that he believed what God said, and his faith, demonstrated by those deeds, caused him to be made righteous in the sight of God. Now, lest you misunderstand me, I did not say the works of the law justified him, but the works of faith did. The second example of validated faith James uses is even more striking, because it's Rahab the harlot. She was made righteous because her faith moved her to action. Her willingness to hide the spies showed that she believed what she said. She said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint because of you." And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted, and neither did there remain any courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. And then she further validated her faith by asking them to spare her and her family from destruction when they conquered the city. This was genuine converting faith in action. The final verse of our text concludes by saying, "Just as the body without breath is dead, so belief without action is dead also." Each of the three sections of verses we've looked at in our study today ends on this same note. One of the principles of studying a Bible text is to look for things that are repeated, because repetition is a way of showing the importance of a subject. James reminds us 3 times in 13 verses, faith without works is dead. Why the need for repetition? Do we find it so easy to give mental assent to the truth and yet so challenging to put that belief into daily actions? Let me ask you this. Is your faith simply an abstraction? Is it an intellectual exercise? Or is it a genuine living faith that expresses itself in your daily life? Do your works validate your faith? Only a living faith that pleases God will experience his blessed words, "Well done, good and faithful servant."
Thanks, J. Mark. I would say you have been faithful in teaching us about faith. We looked at 3 types of faith. One of them is worthwhile, and this is the one we aim to grow in and have more of. If you have any questions about this teaching, or if you would like to hear other teaching from Heralds of Hope, here is how you can reach us. Our email is hope@heraldsofhope.org, or you could contact us via our website. The address is heraldsofhope.org. The important thing for us is hearing from you. Thanks again for being with us for today's teaching. With God's help, we can grow in our faith and be found faithful when He comes. We also ask Him to help us maintain a healthy balance between our faith and our works. We want to handle this wisely, so we seek His wisdom in all things.